Thank you for attending this session on how individuals are taking ownership of their digital identities. My name is Julie Esser. I'm Chief Engagement Officer for CULedger. I'm joined with Drummond Reed.
Hi, I'm Drummond Reed. I'm at Evernym. My title is Chief Trust Officer, and I'm one of the trustees of the Sovereign Foundation. A number of you probably just heard the talk on Sovereign that Nathan George, the Sovereign CTO, just gave. We're going to go deeper into one of the projects based on Sovereign, which is CULedger, my CUID.
All right. So we have three parts of this presentation. We're going to get into the kind of the why. Drummond's going to show you the how, and then fingers crossed, hopefully my demo will work a little bit better than it did this morning. So let's just jump into this real quick. I want to really start for those of you in the room that might not be familiar with what credit unions are. Credit union is a term that's very common in the U.S. However, credit unions are all over the world, actually. They're called financial cooperatives. And they're owned and controlled by their members. So once you become a member of a credit union, you're in for life. You share a common bond, meaning that there is some type of association that you have with that particular credit union. Most credit unions are based on are occupational based, meaning there's this affiliation between an employer group and the credit union itself. That's how they were first started. But there are other types as well. There's associations. So if you belong to a charity or contribute to a charity or belong to a church, you might be associated with a credit union, as well as their community base as well. So if you live, work, or worship within a geographic boundary, you're eligible for membership. They share a non-for-profit structure, so they're non-for-profit financial cooperatives, meaning that you as members of the organization share in the profits as well. A lot of them do also distribute those profits back into the credit union, bringing higher interest rates on loans, or excuse me, higher interest rates on savings, lower interest rates on loans, and lower fees. And they also have a volunteer board of directors. So they're the ones that are making the decisions, and that's kind of why we have a conservative type of nature. They're very protective of how they spend and utilize their members' dollars. So when we look at CULedger, we're looking at a truly global type of organization. We want to be able to leverage the entire industry, which makes up of over 89,000 credit unions today and over 260 million consumers. In the U.S., we make up probably about 101, I think it is, million consumers in the U.S., so about half. So why is this important? It's important because there is a very strong relationship between consumers and their credit unions, and consumers have a very high value of trust in their relationship with their credit union. And then that also coincides with the satisfaction levels that credit unions have among their membership. They're very high touch, they're very service-driven, they're service-oriented. Because of their close affiliation and association, there really truly is, as I know you, kind of service mentality. But this is what keeps me up at night that could really jeopardize that trusting relationship. And if you are not familiar with this website, you might want to Google it because I think it's so cool. I mean, not cool of all the data breaches, just how they visually provide this information in this bubble type of format. But you can see on this website all the breaches that have occurred since 2014. And it really gets into the specifics in terms of the types and the number of records that are breached. But you know, this is happening all the time. We hear about the ones in the news, all the big ones, the Marriott, the Starwood one that just happened, but there's so many others that go under the radar. And in fact, that there were 140 million records that were leaked in July of this year alone. It's just mind-boggling to think about. But then that also coincides with these other factors, right? So we have annual fraud costs. So, how much is this fraud costing us, all these hacking attacks? Identity theft is at an all-time high. I don't think that's going to go down this year when we get those numbers. But when you have these issues going on, then it just penetrates the amount of cost that has to go into this infrastructure. credit unions as a whole, as you saw on that other slide, we are 9% penetration of the population. So we are a very small part of the financial services sector, which means that we don't have a lot of resources. And so the cost of being compliant is huge. I mean, it's a huge issue that faces credit unions all the time because we have to adhere to the same standards as a mega bank in the US, for example. So who is CULedger? CULedger began as a research to action project in early 2016 and really spun out into a large consortium all over the world. We had 70 entities, credit unions and credit union service organizations that contributed $650,000 to this research to action effort in developing a working proof of concept. We're not interested in necessarily in the cryptocurrency space, as it was pretty hyped at that time, but we knew that there was a lot of operational benefits that decentralized technology could have on credit unions, and so that's where our focus was. So we, after we had a successful working proof of concept where we did a digital identity in a call center environment, we actually formed the organization. And it's a credit union service organization, which means it's a for-profit entity that is owned by one or more credit unions. And we have over 50 credit unions that own this, and they will have majority ownership of this, which translates, if you are a credit union member, you technically own CULedger. So that all works out really well. But our mission is to deliver the world's premier platform of digital exchange for financial cooperatives. And I say cooperatives because we have a global initiative. And the three areas that we're concentrated on first is the area of digital exchange in identity. So this year in February, we had issued MyCUID, that's why we're here to showcase this, which is the first universal self-sovereign digital identity credential. And then the second component of our digital exchange is in information. So the ability to use smart contracts in a lot of different lending aspects, in particular loan participation, so credit unions can share different loans. You can incorporate smart contracts in the lending process, in the onboarding process as well in terms of new membership. So there are a lot of use cases there. Then the third component of that is in currency. So I mentioned that we're not in the cryptocurrency business. However, the notion of digital currency is also an interesting one. That's going to happen sometime or another, and we want to make sure that credit unions are part of that equation as well. So why is digital identity so important? It really is the foundational aspect of everything a credit union does. So when you think about your financial relationship, anytime you try to transact, there's some level of authentication that occurs. So every interaction starts with identifying who you are, whether that be in a call-in environment where you're calling the contact center, you're walking into a branch, or you're logging into your mobile banking or your internet banking applications. We did some research early on, and it showed that from a consumer's perspective, identity management is a real pain in their sides, right? We have a plethora of usernames and passwords that we have to manage every day. And if you're like me, you probably saw my 3 kids that never like to have their picture taken. They expect me to manage their identities as well. And so that multiplies as we get older in certain years of our life. And from a benefit perspective, many of the consumers that we survey saw MyCUID as a very positive aspect, that it has the promise of eliminating the usernames and passwords they currently maintain. It can offer a secure form of identification. But most importantly, what consumers told us is that if credit unions issued these credentials, they're likely to switch financial institutions. And for us, that's huge, especially when you're dealing with a 9% market share. So with that, I will turn it into the part 2 of our program.
So Julie has painted the picture of the business need in the market that the credit union industry and CULedger has identified. So I'm going to answer the question, well, why are they using HyperLedger Indy and Sovereign, again, that you just heard about from Nathan George, the CTO. So first of all, just to make it clear what the relationships are. So at the Linux Foundation, it is the home of the HyperLedger family of projects, which is why we're all here. One of those, HyperLedger Indy, as you're aware, is the project on digital identity. that was originally contributed to HyperLedger from the Sovereign Foundation. And as you just heard from Nathan, the Sovereign Foundation is a global nonprofit foundation, has one and only one purpose: to govern global nonprofit public utility for self-sovereign identity. That's its only purpose. It's similar in many ways to what the domain name system does for the internet, but it's cryptographic self-sovereign identity. So that was the particular blockchain technology. The CULedger said that's what we can use to deliver this new digital credential. So I'm going to quickly explain. I've been keeping track. So far, every single presentation slot here today has included a talk on self-sovereign identity, this new decentralized identity area. Why? I'm going to explain it with quickly explaining the three models of digital identity we've been through in the evolution of the internet. We started out, everyone's familiar with this model. You exist only in the form of an account at some website or some application someplace, right? We're all familiar with this. This is why we have tens, hundreds, I've heard of people that even go into the thousands of passwords and independent sites they're part of. Now, just to accomplish that safely on the internet actually involved 7 years worth of development of standards. Those are now the most widely adopted, SSL and TLS, the most widely adopted encryption standards in the world, just so you could have a secure connection with a website, all right? But all the pain of you having to maintain that, you being the engine of driving that every place, and the fact that you don't have any independent digital identity, the solution, the first generation solution to that problem was to put a service provider in the middle. The term IDP is used within the industry. It stands for identity provider. Almost all of you have probably at one time or the other either used or been tempted to use that login with Facebook, login with Google, login with Twitter button. That's called social sign-in. That's using this model of identity where you log into a service provider and they turn around and log you in or share some attribute data with the website or application that you're going to log into. This federated model has been successful to a limited standpoint. All of you that work for major corporations are using some form of federation within your corporation to provide single sign-on into systems, okay? It's only practical. It's just cost savings for you and for the company as employees. Now, that took 3 generations of open standards, and this is where I came into the industry, actually initially working around SAML. 3 generations of open standards just to try and figure out how to solve that problem technologically. The problem is it hasn't actually been very successful. By sticking a service provider in the middle, you actually create, in many cases, as many problems as you solve, okay? That identity is not portable. It's limited to what is available from that one service provider, and there is no identity provider that services the whole world. You just can't get everyone to agree on it, even if it's Google or Facebook. You can't use Facebook to log in, or either one of those to log into your credit union or a bank, for example. Their security isn't high enough. So that takes us to the 3rd generation, what is widely been called self-sovereign identity, or SSI. Now, if you look at this model, we go back to just 2 parties. But notice, you're no longer a dotted circle. You are a first-class citizen or entity on the internet, and you don't have an account someplace, right? If I turn around and form a relationship with you and get out a business card, I don't say, hey, thank you for forming an account with me, right? We're forming a relationship, technically a connection, all right? It's a mutual connection. It goes in both directions with whatever peer, and that other peer could be a person, could be an organization, or it could be a thing. Self-sovereign identity is not just for people. It's for organization, things, anything that needs identity on the internet. So why is blockchain what enables this? Why is this a secret to being able to go to this? Here's the reason. What makes this work is, I get at my favorite prop now. Ladies and gentlemen, decentralized self-sovereign identity. You all know how to use it. Now, the one thing that this is not is blockchain enabled, okay? If I give you a credential, or I walk into an airport and give one of these credentials to a TSA representative, they verify it, but they don't use crypto, right? They actually use blacklight technology on that US driver's license there, but they don't use crypto, which means it's actually fairly easy to spoof. But that's how it works. I have a set of credentials that I get from trusted authorities, and I go and give them to the verifiers that choose to accept those credentials. I control this wallet. I control what goes in it. Verifiers decide what they accept. Issuers decide what they issue. There's no central authority in the world for it. That is, all we're doing is taking this and putting it on this, okay? Now, in order to do that, it actually takes, just to make it clear, so where do you get the credentials that actually make this work? If I issue my own credential, yeah, it might be fine as a business card. It's not going to get me on a plane at an airport. I need to get a credential from some other party, just like I got this driver's license or my passport. So I'm going to get it from some peer, and then I'm going to show it to another peer. That's basic protocol, peer-to-peer, works everywhere. To do all this, we actually need 4 open standards. So the first one is, how do we actually put what we call a decentralized identifier on a blockchain? And why do we need that? What makes this system trusted is the ability for the verifier, when I show a credential, to verify the signature on that credential from the issuer. How can we do that in an interoperable way without any one single root of trust that we all have to go to? That's where this piece comes in. We use a blockchain, and we don't use it for anything fancier than decentralized key management. A DID is simply the address of a public key on a blockchain. But by separating the address from the key pair, the public key specifically, you can rotate keys, you can recover keys, you can associate hierarchical deterministic keys, all with an identifier that doesn't have to change, and which you can cryptographically prove control of. So you, as an individual or an organization or a thing, can have a persistent lifetime identity with the associated cryptographic control, and you don't have to rely on any single service provider. So Sovereign as a network, as a system, was built from the ground up to say, hey, we just need this piece. And that's the piece that is at HyperLedger. That's the Indy node project. All of this up here actually takes place off-ledger. It's entirely off-ledger exchange. This is called the Indy agent project. And whereas this project is fairly mature, and I mean, it's still evolving, but most of the development energy is now up here. Okay? Now, the other things you need is you need interoperable open standards for wallets. This is something called DKMS, which was a year-long project funded by the US Department of Homeland Security. And there's a whole paper on it in the HyperLedger Indy. If you just Google HyperLedger Indy DKMS, you'll get a link to that paper. The third thing is, how do you authenticate between these two parties? This is called DID-Auth. It's now being layered over those other protocols, OpenID Connect, WebAuthn, FIDO. They're all saying, hey, we can add the support for this. And finally, of course, you need for the verifiable credentials to be interoperable. That standard has been a working group at the W3C almost 2 years now, and it should complete the first generation within the next 6 months. So that's why this is now possible for all this to happen. And I'm going to just make it clear, when we're talking about putting a wallet on a phone, it's not just for a set of keys. It actually includes, it's the DIDs, the key pairs that go behind those DIDs. Every one of those keys has an associated endpoint such that you can establish that channel, typically in the cloud, and then the cloud talks down to your local devices. In order to do it safely, I'm going to cover this in a minute, there's another thing in there called a link secret. And lastly, that's where the credentials go, just like they go in this wallet. As they're issued to me over the connections I create with the issuers, they go in the wallet, and then I create connections with various verifiers. One of the keys to all that is how to do it with privacy by design, top to bottom. And that's the last thing I'm going to explain here. Anyone who was in Nathan's sessions saw this same diagram. It's the basic concept of verifiable credentials. If I were to get out this driver's license, which I will do right here. So this piece of plastic was issued by the state of Washington. I'm a U.S. resident, and that's how driver's licenses are issued at the state level. So they give it to me, I put it in my wallet, I go to the airport and show it to a TSA agent. The digital equivalent of that is Washington State DMV would register a DID on their choice of any network that supported them. DIDs are not specific to Sovereign. It's an open standard that has already got support Bitcoin, Ethereum. I think there are about a dozen different called DID methods that have been created. They choose the DID network that they want to register that on, and the public key, the DID and public key are up here. They, of course, have the private key. I then show up, and I prove my identity to them exactly the way I would to get this piece of plastic, right? Whatever they need to do, that's up to them. When they're satisfied, they issue me the credential. It goes into my wallet, and then I go to TSA, and how many folks came to this conference and used a mobile boarding pass? Put up your hands right now. All right, almost half the room did it. Just imagine the exact same QR code that you used to show that boarding pass. It's now your driver's license or any other credential in your wallet, right? One scan, you can share a credential, one scan from some issuer, and that's how you get a credential. We don't need to invent new UI patterns for this. We just need all the crypto and infrastructure to do it. Now, with Sovereign, the last point I'll make, this is actually Sovereign and HyperLedger into specific. This is the generic model. But with Sovereign, we've said, for privacy by design, we're going to take two more steps. One is, as you form these connections up here, they're done with pairwise pseudonymous DIDs. These do not go on a public ledger. If I was to exchange business cards with Julie right now, my wallet would generate a DID literally from the key pair and exchange it with her. She would exchange the same thing with me. We're the only two in the world that know those DIDs and have exchanged those keys. We now have a persistent private connection forever with no intermediate service provider. I can move my cloud agent, she can move her cloud agents, we can use every service we want for the rest of our lives, and we will still have that connection. Same thing is true between me and any company or me and any device that I connect to. This is part of the power of DIDs and self-sovereign identity, and it's all powered because we have the shared blockchains. The second piece, and the one you probably want to go deepest on with someone like Nathan, is the exchange protocol that we use for these credentials uses zero-knowledge cryptography. I have nowhere near enough time to explain why we made that decision. At the time it was made about 18 months ago, there were a lot of folks that thought we were nuts, right? No one had ever used zero-knowledge crypto at this kind of scale. And now I'm happy to tell you that there are literally hundreds of companies and governments that have said, we now see it's the only way to do this with adequate privacy. This, by zero-knowledge encoding this credential, it means I can prove anything on this driver's license, just what a verifier needs to know. I go to a bar, I can prove just I'm over the drinking age. Right? I go to even the TSA, they just need to know I'm a US citizen of a state with a valid driver's license. They don't need to know any of that rest of that information. So this is the first step in reclaiming our privacy on the internet. So that's the end of that. Of course, we can go much deeper, and there will be more sessions on that, but that's enough of the how. And Julie is going to take back over and go into an example of what this is actually going to look like.
Yeah, so this is kind of what it ends up looking like. So from our perspective, we want MyCUID to be the first KYC-backed credential that's issued by credit unions that really sets the gold standard for internet identity. And the financial crisis that occurred in 2008, credit unions were not part of that. In fact, we were really held to a standard. Like it or not, our conservative nature probably helped us in this example, where we were able to demonstrate our processes and what we go through and how we didn't get caught in that web. We want to do the same thing here, but only be more proactive in nature as it relates to identity. So let me start part 3, or the last part of our session today. I'm going to try and pull off this demo, and hopefully it's not going to blast your ears. But before I do that, I should mention why we chose this demo and this proof of concept in the first place. So in credit unions and financial services in a whole, there has been an increase of fraud that exists in a call center channel. So there are fraudsters out there that are using this channel to social engineer these entry-level positions to get very sensitive information on individuals to do really bad things. In fact, where we've seen, like, as an industry overall, this is not just credit unions, 113% increase in this fraud in this channel over 2017. All right, so with that.
And part of that is, by the way, those data breaches, right?
Yes.
All that Equifax data didn't just go off into the ether. It went into the hands of folks that are now using it to successfully impersonate you in those calls.
All right, let's see if I can knock this off.
At CULedger, we know that protecting our members is one of our #1 jobs for credit unions. It's hard. We ask them a lot of hard questions, especially when they call into the contact center. Some of these questions, imagine the phone rings and Mr. Bond is phoning in. We got to verify this is who they say they are. 20 to 60 seconds of interrogation doesn't leave our members feeling exactly happy. So this time, after we've done that, the MSR invites them to get a MyCUID they can use later, which is far faster and far more secure. The member installs the application. We establish a cryptographically protected and private channel. It's unique for the credit union and this member. Every different member has a totally different connection. We've now got a secure connection. We're going to offer that member a credential. So Mr. Bond receives a credential called a MyCUID and goes through and accepts that. This means that they have this credential that is controlled on their device. It's biometrically locked into the hardware of their device. So as this credential is offered, the cryptographic magic, I guess, on the phone as well as on the server side, we've now got a connection. The MSR is now going to test this exactly like they would test it or use it when the member phones in next. They do an authenticate. The member is asked to show and share that proof. If they're not on the phone with the credit union, they would simply reject that. They send that proof over. Again, more cryptographic stuff happens here. We've now shared that credential, and at the MSR end, it shows that they're authenticated. Now we have this critical credential. Imagine weeks later I lose my phone, or Mr. Bond, I'm not Mr. Bond, loses his phone. We can quickly cancel and remove that credential. Very simple and fast.
I should have warned you how fast this was going to go, but this was real time. I mean, we want to do this, and we want to be able to authenticate in less than 5 seconds on any different channel, and you see how quickly that can happen. That's pretty cool, isn't it?
Now, a key point to make about that experience you just saw, there are banks that offer various forms of banks, credit unions, financial institutions, high authentication requirements that offer multi-factor authentication today. Almost all of you are probably using it with your bank or financial institution, and that's the only place you can use it. In some cases, you can use it with a handful of other places. That credential you just saw could be used by any website or application in the world that decides to accept that credential. It's all open standards, and part of the HyperLedger Indie project, it will continue to grow, is going to be the libraries that sites and apps need to plug in to start to accept self-sovereign identity exactly the same way they could go to Facebook and get the Facebook connector plugin, or LinkedIn to get the LinkedIn connector plugin, but it only works with those one systems. With self-sovereign identity powered by blockchain and HyperLedger Indie at the Linux Foundation, we're going to break out of those silos once and for all, and the credit union industry is leading our way into that.
Thanks. Just want to close with a real quick statement. So when you go back to your respective organizations and share what you've seen and have learned about over the last couple of days, and you're more interested in sharing the CULedger story with your colleagues, we are planning a live stream event on January 18th. We're hoping this is going to be a worldwide event, so I don't have a date posted yet, but on CULedger.com is our website, and they'll have more information there. Or anytime you want to get text updates on what we're doing in this space, there's an opportunity to opt in for text alerts as well. Thank you.
Questions?
My name is Gerard Dittman with IBM Research. I'm wondering, you mentioned both anonymity and KYC in the same talk, which makes sense because they're both identity related, but they seem to be the opposite ends of that. Are they two fundamentally different use cases? Is there a continuum? How do you combine the two in a single system?
You want me to take that one?
Sure. I'll add to it.
The short answer is it is a continuum. I actually have a separate slide, most of a talk that I do about that continuum, from what we call a Evernym, fully legally verifiable identity, all the way to a perfect anonym. That is an entire spectrum. Sovereign infrastructure and HyperLedger Indy is designed to support every point in that spectrum. So it really comes down to the context of any particular relationship. Obviously, dealing with a financial service provider, there are legal regulations that require KYC, not just legally verifiable identity, but to a certain standard that's acceptable in that jurisdiction. However, that's not and should not be the requirement for all your interactions on the internet. So part of the whole idea, what Phil Windley, the Sovereign Foundation chairman, who, by the way, has a great blog with about 24 different articles about different aspects of both sovereign and self-sovereign identity and HyperLedger Indy, talks about is multi-source identity, meaning every one of the credentials I have on this wall, it came from a different source. They all have different contexts, different abilities to, in most cases, these all clearly identify me. They will be what we call very anonymous credentials. They're associated with my legal identity. But with digital credentials, we can now go over and cover more of the spectrum. For instance, I can use this driver's license, but only prove I'm over a certain age. So I don't have to give up my identity to the bouncer or whoever's there. So I want to give a huge shout out. You're from IBM. It's Jan Kamenisch and his team, Maria Lesenskia, at IBM that pioneered a lot of the zero-knowledge cryptography that is used. Jan is a member, he's no longer at IBM actually, but he is a member of the Technical Governance Board at the Sovereign Foundation. So it is that zero-knowledge crypto that allows us to support that whole spectrum.
Thanks, that looked really good. Just quickly, is it in production or is this still POC?
So where we are initiating our alpha pilots. So we've done some production work on a very small scale. So we just launched our alpha pilots to a group of 6 credit unions and another credit union service organization to help us gain scale. We'll be running those through the first part of 2019. We'll be expanding those pilots in the March timeframe that go from a small test of credit union employees that are credit union members to more of the consumer base of the membership. And then we're planning commercialization and general availability towards the end of 2019. You're welcome.
Thank you. I'm Ellen from company Orpheus Swiss company, and I'm interested in how you onboard individuals on your network. Like you said that public key is stored on the ledger or in the blockchain, in the block itself. But where is the private key? How keys are exchanged?
Right. So I'm going to give you a couple points here to make sure it's clear, because it's very, very commonly misunderstood. So it's really a great question. So first of all, for every relationship you have, again, in Sovereign, it's not necessarily this case with other blockchain identity projects, but with HyperLedger Indy Codebase and with Sovereign, the default is what we call pairwise pseudonymous identifiers and relationships and keys. That means every time you form a new relationship, you generate a unique DID and you share the public key with that other party. All of those end up going in your wallet on your devices. They do not go on the public blockchain. The only parties that need to have a DID and a public key on the public blockchain are issuers of credentials that need to be widely verifiable. Passport agencies, government agencies, corporations that want to issue employee credentials. And there's already been a project, Workday, one of the largest providers of HR service in the world, has done a project with IBM and ATB, who gave a talk earlier today, showing Workday issuing an employee credential that you could then take to ATB to enroll for a bank account. Workday, ATB, and IBM would all need public DIDs because their signatures on those credentials need to be widely verified. But when you and I share a business card, it's just between us. You know it's me, I know it's you, we can keep that channel forever, but that doesn't need to be on a public blockchain. So the keys, all those keys for an individual end up on their devices and then encrypted backup in the cloud. Someone's going to ask the question, what do you do when you lose your phone? How do you recover those keys? That I'm going to just simply say, if you really want the answer to that question, go Google HyperLedger Indy DKMS and read the 65-page paper that includes 20 flow diagrams on how key recovery works.
Okay.
It's a deep, deep topic.
So one more question there.
Sure.
If I want to initiate my onboarding on your ledger, so I do it with biometrics?
Okay, another great question. First, let me explain. Current digital identity systems, what we've had up until this point, you do exactly what you say. You onboard a customer into a system, okay? With self-sovereign identity, there is no onboarding a customer into a system. There is only giving them a credential. I have a wallet full of credentials from all the issuers of credentials that I need. So if you're an issuer of a credential, like a credit union is going to be issuing a MyCUID, then you will issue that credential according to your requirements for what a customer needs to do to earn that. By the way, that's going to be a very standardized process. The best practice Sovereign Foundation is created is called a governance framework. We've developed one for the whole of the Sovereign network, but is designed for other what we call domain-specific governance frameworks, like the one being developed by the credit unions. And that's the set of rules, the policies and procedures against which they will issue a MyCUID credential, and they will revoke it. We haven't said much about revocation, but the other problem that a public blockchain can solve is you can make credentials revocable. It's another feat of zero-knowledge cryptography. It's also explained in that DKMS paper. But that way, the issuer simply, according to its governance framework, they will issue you the credential, and if for some reason you break the rules or you're no longer a CULedger member, whatever, then they can revoke the credential. But that's all up to you as an issuer, and every issuer can have their own rules, and every verifier out there can decide what issuers they trust.
Okay, so you are the bridge between myself as an individual and service providers.
That's a good way to put it, yes. You can think of it, what the public blockchain space solves with HyperLedger Indy and the agent-to-agent protocol is a universal bridge. Google would like to be that bridge. Facebook would like to be that bridge, but that's the situation we're in right now. You have to pick a particular bridge, and there is no bridge to everywhere. What we're building here is something that is internet-wide.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Second question. There's often a power imbalance between the person who's asking to see credentials and the person who has to provide it. We know that from mobile phone apps, where often the app providers, the app vendors require a lot of permissions that we would rather not give them. Any thoughts on that? I mean, it's not really a technology question, but I guess more a social hacking question.
I'm happy to that question comes up a lot. And it's actually one of the reasons I'm here. I've been working in internet identity for 20 years. And first of all, I don't think self-sovereign identity is a panacea to that, but it is a great leveler of the playing field, okay? And once again, if you're keeping count how many times I pulled out my wallet, there's certainly a power imbalance in the issuers of these credentials, but I don't see any of us going around complaining about that, right? That power balance exists in a much greater form on the internet because of the computing power and information aggregation power certain folks have out there versus me as an individual that have almost none. That we, I think, are going a long ways towards saying, look, I can now go get a credential from any issuer, right? And I can share it with any verifier. That's a much more level playing field than what we have today. So I don't think it's a panacea, but I will tell you there are already folks coming to the Sovereign Foundation and to vendors like Evernym saying, hey, we've got an innovative new idea for how to provide credentials largely to individuals. In some cases, by the way, business credentials. If you haven't seen the BC government's and the Ontario government's presentation on HyperLedger and Catalyst and the Oracle service, businesses are also going to have credentials. And that's going to help level the playing field for them, too. So I think it will make a difference. We'll have to see how much.
I think this is a question for Julie. It's kind of about the economic model. So let's say I'm a mobile phone service provider, and I want to use the CU credential. Mm-hmm. Is that something I would have to pay to the credit union or some group? Would there be a fee for me to use that in my non-credit union application?
The way we're structuring it, and we're actually kind of fine-tuning that right now. Now that we have our credit union investor pool, we're bringing them in on more of a committee structure to give us input on pricing. Our goal is to make the enrollment process to be a low-cost or no-cost type of model. There might be a transaction fee, but really the revenue model will be on the verifier. So if it's another entity, let's say another bank or a credit union or a merchant that wants access to them that credential, the verifier are the ones that are going to be actually paying for it. But you kind of think about some of the conversation that were happening earlier about loyalty and the ability for someone to monetize some parts of their information. That's an interesting concept. We haven't gone down that road, but we're exploring all of those type of things.
So the question's a little more pointed. If it's my credentials and my digital identity data, does any of that revenue flow back to me?
Possibly. I mean, in the forms of, if, it's a kind of a vicious circle. If specifically about the MyCUID credential revenue, I don't have an answer for you yet. But on the back side of it, when you think about how long processes take, so the cost savings that would exist from using those type of credentials from an operations standpoint could likely go back to dividends, back to the members, or back into other new programs for the membership. I mean, there's a lot of those possibilities. We just haven't yet defined those yet.
Hi, thanks. This is really interesting stuff. I'm Axel Simon. I'm with Red Hat, though my question doesn't have much to do with my employer. Okay, let's take a real context. So someone's at the door of a club, they want to get in, and the app just asks them also beyond their age for their name, their gender, and their address. The person is likely just going to scan and say, well, okay, whatever, I just want to get in. Are we going to think of any mechanisms that make it possible for them to say, no, I will just actually only allow this thing? Because if we don't make it very practical for people to say no, what I think is likely to happen is just on the web, you must give us all this information to access our services. People just go, well, okay, what can I do?
Yeah.
And I think that's, otherwise we reach the dangers of basically the privacy tax. The club can say, if you give us more information, we will give you a free drink, or we will give you, a little discount. And rich people will say, no, I don't care. But poor people will say, yes, I will do that because it is in my interest. So I think that's a fine line that we should consider.
I strongly agree with you. And there are conversations going on around credentials. And the fact that you will have a digital wallet paired with an agent that can instantly transfer not just one credential, but part of the one of the great benefits of using zero-knowledge proof cryptography is the verifier can give you what they call a proof request that you can answer with any combination of claims, attributes from any set of those credentials. So your ability to share that information has just gone way up here. Now, what I think is our moral responsibility, and I know it is the Sovereign Foundation, the governance framework we developed there, is to say, and we're also going to empower you as an individual to control the exchange. So there is no such thing as any automatic exchange, right? You always are in control of that. What I think we're going to see and what we need, it goes to one of the earlier questions, is social pressure on the verifiers to do proof requests that are appropriate with their needs. Okay. Now, in the EU, there happens to be this little law, which some of us in the U.S. are actually rather fond of, right? Californians particularly. And it's going to really mandate in many cases, the thing about that proof request is I can prove that the verifier gave me that proof request. If they've asked for more, that's why we call it an agent. What's paired with that wallet? That agent can do some pretty smart things, as in go, you know what? Big red flag. They're asking for things you shouldn't ask for that category of business or the location you're in or whatever, right? Or 9 out of 10 people did not respond to that, right? We can start to aggregate the power of those agents. So now it could go the other way too, right? My agent could betray me and I need to, so we're getting into the start of the agent wars, but I'd rather have an agent and companies and consortia like HyperLedger working on my behalf as an individual.
I think we're out of time.
Oh, hell with it. Let's just keep asking questions.
Great.
And I'm fine with that, too.
How about one more? Can we do one more?
I'll make it quick. Hi, Christoph Schneider from the Global LEI Foundation. Should self-sovereign identity like the MyCUID be unique? So should organizations and people have only one of those?
Well, first of all, just to make it clear, as much as Julie and the CULedger would love for everyone to use MyCUID, they're one issuer, right? So every organization that wants to empower you with a digital credential is now, we want to open the floodgates. They believe, and I haven't been a credit union member, but I've been wanting to. Now I'm convinced to do it. But what credit unions have is this unique trust relationship with their members, such that they're a really good starting point. And I personally think it's going to give them a leg up on competing with the banks and others. But there are already other NGO organizations that, a whole area. The 1.1 billion people in the world have no identity that they can legally use or for financial empowerment. So that's an entire segment of the industry, and there's a special council at the Sovereign Foundation called the Identity for All, which is focused just on helping solve that problem. So I hope that it turns into a giant competition of virtuous cycle of issuers who are empowering you, more and more privacy, more and more personal autonomy via digital credentials.
Well, and just to add to that, Drummond, the whole nature of self-sovereign identity is one that you can use anywhere. You own it as a consumer, you control it, it can never be taken away, you can use it however you want to. So even though that you're being issued a MyCUID credential from your credit union, you should be able to use it anywhere you want to, with another banking relationship, another credit union relationship, another merchant relationship, whatever. So that is the intent of that. There'll be a lot of interoperability that I envision happening between a lot of networks. But yeah, in order for it to be truly self-sovereign, it has to operate that way. And the other thing I'd add on to that is a question I get commonly is, why are credit unions so far ahead of this than the banks? And I guess the answer to that is pretty clear in my mind. I mean, I've spent 30 years in this industry, so I'm a little biased. But, it's the collaborative, cooperative nature of these entities that make this happen. We are truly a collaborative industry. We don't have hidden agendas. We don't have shareholders to answer to that have invested dollars into these entities. This is all about us. This is all about the 260 million consumers that are credit union members. And I think I'm getting on my soapbox a little bit here, but, and I'm getting goosebumps. I call it goosebump moments. But, I really think that that's why we are in the position we are today.
So please join a credit union tomorrow, and you'll be the first to get a MyCUID.
Yeah, right, exactly.
All right, thank you very much, everyone.